Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. I am not going to suggest that the ancient Athenians were better people than we are. I am sure that they were not. However, it is hard to imagine there being a worse lot of people than we present to the world, particularly in our most vociferous exemplars. In these days of the hollowing out of our democracy. This hollowing out did not just begin. I think of the invasion of Iraq, which was a military action about which no debate was permissible. Either you voted yes for the invasion or you were a traitor. That was how the question was framed at the time. Once that invasion went ahead, everything that followed had to follow. When Barack Obama became president, I wrote an inaugural poem for him that touched on the points that I felt he should address were he inclined to try to reverse the course upon which the government and the people of the United States was set. I don't believe he touched on those. He, so far as I know, probably never saw my poem. He himself has talked about the difficulties of turning the course of, say, a big ocean liner. It's not so easy. One cannot do it on a dime and all of that. But once that invasion occurred, what was to come was practically set in stone, I think. I wrote a book titled The Condemnation, which it was written days before the invasion occurred, but after it was already 100% certain that it would occur. The Shock and Awe campaign, I believe it was called. And I've read the first poem from the book a number of times, and it starts, "Bury this generation in the ground, and let its names go unremembered, they that willfully assented with no sound to tyranny and terror all around." And it goes on. I didn't bother to pull the book for this. And I think it ought to be said that when I say this generation, although it may well be applied to our current generation, very much so, it, I think, explicitly pertains to my generation. As I say, the decisions which were made leading up to our current, I don't know what the right term is, crisis is not right, our current fiasco. Those decisions were made early on, largely stemming from the response my country had and my country's politicians encouraged to the taking down of the World Trade Center towers in 2001. In fact, I have my book Against Holy War, which argued for a peaceful response. But the politicians opted otherwise. They wanted to use what happened as a pretext to go and carry out this invasion of Iraq as though Saddam Hussein had something to do with the events of September 11, 2001 in New York. So I don't think that citizens of Athens were any better than our citizens. But I was thinking, the one thing that we in America have lost is any sense of integrity. It is not something that the majority seeks for or looks for in a politician, in a leader. And so we have gotten, in a sense, what is our just deserts. If people had looked for integrity in their politicians, possibly they may have gotten something better. It's not a guarantee. And so I've been thinking about integrity in a politician, and I'm sure that I could pull out some examples. In fact, did not John Kennedy write a book, Profiles in Courage, which suggested examples? I think I glanced at that many years ago. I don't think that the book has held up too much, and I don't know who the ghostwriter was of that, if he had one. But my thoughts have been drawn to the presentation of Pericles in the history by Thucydides, the Athenian statesman. And I have to say that the Pericles that we have is not historical in the sense that Thucydides, when he wrote his history, it was his practice and the practice of later historians to write down what he felt the statesman or statesmen in question would have said given the situation. And so what we have of Pericles is an idealized version, and that may have corresponded with the real Pericles, for better or worse. We have no way to check that, or very little. I thought about pulling something from Lincoln because in his case we know better. We understand his words and we understand the machinations behind the words. But I feel like delving into Thucydides a little bit, even though it is the presentation of an ideal, I feel the need to get close to an ideal statesman a little bit through his words. I will say his words, even though, as I say, these are words created by Thucydides. Years ago, before I really got going with my poetic career and my drama career, I had a position in a law office working as a photocopy clerk. I had started as a messenger, and I think my employment lasted almost a year, and then I quit to devote myself to theater. And because of the access to a photocopy machine, I occasionally put together chapbooks. And one that I did was Thucydides. It is not the whole Peloponnesian War, of course. What I opted to reprint was the funeral oration for which Pericles, in this work is known. And then it is followed by a description of the plague and then another little speech by Pericles. So I put them all into a little chapbook. I think in some video I did, possibly about historians that write well, I read a little bit from this. Not from this chapbook, I just went down to the basement and dug it out. You can see it's the Crawley translation. But I thought I would try to read the funeral oration if I can. This may go on a little bit. I haven't read the whole thing through for a long time. I think I did read a little bit in that video about historians who wrote well or something like that. If I did, I'll try to hunt it down and put a link in the description box. Just the thought of listening to a politician and orator that had some integrity feels like an important reminder to me right now. We are living at a time when our politicians want us to chuck out all sense of idealism. Everything has become transactional. That is the word of the day. Honesty, integrity, these are just words betokening foolish concepts. So it goes in the United States today. So let me read. This will not be brief, but I recall it being fairly moving and even fairly prescriptive. And I think we probably all could use a little of that right now. In the same winter, the Athenians gave a funeral at the public cost to those who had first fallen in this war. It was a custom of their ancestors, and the manner of it is as follows. 3 days before the ceremony, the bones of the dead are laid out in a tent which has been erected, and their friends bring to their relatives such offerings as they please. In the funeral procession, cypress coffins are borne in cars, one for each tribe, the bones of the deceased being placed in the coffin of their tribe. Among these is carried one empty bier, decked for the missing, that is, for those whose bodies could not be recovered. Any citizen or stranger who pleases joins in the procession, and the female relatives are there to wail at the burial. The dead are laid in the public sepulchre in the most beautiful suburb of the city, in which those who fall in war are always buried, with the exception of those slain at Marathon, who for their singular and extraordinary valor were interred on the spot where they fell. After the bodies have been laid in the earth, a man chosen by the state, of approved wisdom and eminent reputation, pronounces over them an appropriate panegyric, after which all retire. Such is the manner of the burying, and throughout the whole war, whenever the occasion arose, the established custom was observed. Meanwhile, these were the first that had fallen, and Pericles, son of Xanthippus, was chosen to pronounce their eulogium. When the proper time arrived, he advanced from the sepulchre to an elevated platform in order to be heard by as many of the crowd as possible, and spoke as follows. Most of my predecessors in this place have commended him who made this speech part of the law, telling us that it is well that it should be delivered at the burial of those who fall in battle. For myself, I should have thought that the worth which had displayed itself in deeds would be sufficiently rewarded by honors also shown by deeds, such as you now see in this funeral prepared at the people's cost. And I could have wished that the reputations of many brave men were not to be imperiled in the mouth of a single individual, to stand or fall according as he spoke well or ill. For it is hard to speak properly upon a subject where it is even difficult to convince your hearers that you are speaking the truth. On the one hand, the friend who is familiar with every fact of the story may think that some point has not been set forth with that fullness which he wishes and knows it to deserve. On the other, he who is a stranger to the matter may be led by envy to suspect exaggeration if he hears anything above his own nature. For men can endure to hear others praised only so long as they can severally persuade themselves of their own ability to equal the actions recounted. When this point is passed, envy comes in, and with it incredulity. However, since our ancestors have stamped this custom with their approval, it becomes my duty to obey the law and to try to satisfy your several wishes and opinions as best I may. I shall begin with our ancestors. It is both just and proper that they should have the honor of the first mention on an occasion like the present. They dwelt in the country without break in the succession from generation to generation, and handed it down free to the present time by their valor. And if our more remote ancestors deserve praise, much more do our own fathers, who added to their inheritance the empire which we now possess, and spared no pains to be able to leave their acquisitions to us of the present generation. Lastly, there are few parts of our dominions that have not been augmented by those of us here who are still more or less in the vigor of life, while the mother country has been furnished by us with everything that can enable her to depend on her own resources, whether for war or for peace. That part of our history which tells of the military achievements which gave us our several possessions, or of the ready valor with which either we or our fathers stemmed the tide of Hellenic or foreign aggression, is a theme too familiar to my hearers for me to dilate on, and I shall therefore pass it by. But what was the road by which we reached our position? What the form of government under which our greatness grew? What the national habits out of which it sprang? These are questions which I may try to solve before I proceed to my panegyric upon these men, since I think this to be a subject upon which, on the present occasion, a speaker may properly dwell, and to which the whole assemblage, whether citizens or foreigners, may listen with advantage. Our Constitution does not copy the laws of neighboring states. We are rather a pattern to others than imitators ourselves. Its administration favors the many instead of the few. This is why it is called a democracy. If we look to the laws, they afford equal justice to all in their private differences. If to social standing, advancement in public life falls to reputation for capacity, class considerations not being allowed to interfere with merit. Nor again does poverty bar the way. If a man is able to serve the state, he is not hindered by the obscurity of his condition. The freedom which we enjoy in our government extends also to our ordinary life. There, far from exercising a jealous surveillance over each other, we do not feel called upon to be angry with our neighbor for doing what he likes, or even to indulge in those injurious looks which cannot fail to be offensive, although they inflict no positive penalty. But all this ease in our private relations does not make us lawless as citizens. Against this fear is our chief safeguard, teaching us to obey the magistrates and the laws, particularly such as regard the protection of the injured, whether they are actually on the statute book or belong to that code which, although unwritten, yet cannot be broken without acknowledged disgrace. Further, we provide plenty of means for the mind to refresh itself from business. We celebrate games and sacrifices all the year round, and the elegance of our private establishments forms a daily source of pleasure and helps to banish the spleen, while the magnitude of our city draws the produce of the world into our harbor, so that to the Athenian the fruits of other countries are as familiar a luxury as those of his own. If we turn to our military policy, there also we differ from our antagonists. We throw open our city to the world, and never by alien acts exclude foreigners from any opportunity of learning or observing, although the eyes of an enemy may occasionally profit by our liberality, trusting less in system and policy than to the native spirit of our citizens. While in education, where our rivals from their very cradles, by a painful discipline, seek after manliness, at Athens we live exactly as we please, and yet are just as ready to encounter every legitimate danger. In proof of this, it may be noticed that the Lacedaemonians do not invade our country alone, but bring with them all their confederates, while we Athenians advance unsupported into the territory of a neighbor, and fighting upon a foreign soil, usually vanquish with ease men who are defending their homes. Our united force was never yet encountered by any enemy, because we have at once to attend to our marine and to dispatch our citizens by land upon 100 different services, so that wherever they engage with some such fraction of our strength, a success against a detachment is magnified into a victory over the nation, and a defeat into a reverse suffered at the hands of our entire people. And yet, if with habits not of labor but of ease, and courage not of art but of nature, we are still willing to encounter danger, we have the double advantage of escaping the experience of hardships in anticipation and of facing them in the hour of need as fearlessly as those who are never free from them. Nor are these the only points in which our city is worthy of admiration. We cultivate refinement without extravagance, and knowledge without effeminacy. Wealth we employ more for use than for show, and place the real disgrace of poverty not in owning to the fact, but in declining the struggle against it. Our public men have, besides politics, their private affairs to attend to, and our ordinary citizens, though occupied with the pursuits of industry, are still fair judges of public matters. For unlike any other nation, regarding him who takes no part in these duties not as unambitious, but as useless, we Athenians are able to judge at all events if we cannot originate, and instead of looking on discussion as a stumbling block in the way of action, we think it an indispensable preliminary to any wise action at all. Again, in our enterprises, we present the singular spectacle of daring and deliberation, each carried to its highest point, and both united in the same persons. Although usually decision is the fruit of ignorance, hesitation, of reflection. But the palm of courage will surely be adjudged most justly to those who best know the difference between hardship and pleasure, and yet are never tempted to shrink from danger. In generosity, we are equally singular, acquiring our friends by conferring, not by receiving favors. Yet, of course, the doer of the favor is the firmer friend of the two, in order, by continued kindness, to keep the recipient in his debt, while the debtor feels less keenly from the very consciousness that the return he makes will be a payment, not a free gift. And it is only the Athenians who, fearless of consequences, confer their benefits not from calculations of expediency, but in the confidence of liberality. In short, I say that as a city we are the school of Hellas, while I doubt if the world can produce a man who, where he has only himself to depend upon, is equal to so many emergencies and graced by so happy a versatility as the Athenian. And this is no mere boast thrown out for the occasion, but plain matter of fact. The power of the state acquired by these habits proves. For Athens alone of her contemporaries is found, when tested, to be greater than her reputation, and alone gives no occasion to her assailants to blush at the antagonist by whom they have been worsted, or to her subjects to question her title by merit to rule. Rather, the admiration of the present and succeeding ages will be ours, since we have not left our power without witness, but have shown it by many proofs. And far from needing a Homer for our panegyrist, or other of his craft whose verses might charm for the moment only for the impression which they give to melt at the touch of fact, we have forced every sea and land to be the highway of our daring, and everywhere, whether for evil or for good, have left imperishable monuments behind us. Such is the Athens for which these men, in the assertion of their resolve not to lose her, nobly fought and died, and well may every one of their survivors be ready to suffer in her cause. Indeed, if I have dwelt at some length upon the character of our country, it has been to show that our stake in the struggle is not the same as theirs who have no such blessings to lose, and also that the panegyric of the men over whom I am now speaking might be by definite proofs established. That panegyric is now in a great measure complete, for the Athens that I have celebrated is only what the heroism of these and their like have made her, men whose fame, unlike that of most Hellenes, will be found to be only commensurate with their deserts. And if a test of worth be wanted, it is to be found in their closing scene, and this not only in the cases in which it set the final seal upon their merit, but also in those in which it gave the first intimation of their having any. For there is justice in the claim that steadfastness in his country's battles should be as a cloak to cover a man's other imperfections, since the good action has blotted out the bad, and his merit as a citizen more than outweighed his demerits as an individual. But none of these allowed either wealth with its prospect of future enjoyment to unnerve his spirit, or poverty with its hope of a day of freedom and riches to tempt him to shrink from danger. No, holding that vengeance upon their enemies was more to be desired than any personal blessings, and reckoning this to be the most glorious of hazards, they joyfully determined to accept the risk, to make sure of their vengeance, and to let their wishes wait. And while committing to hope the uncertainty of final success, in the business before them, they thought fit to act boldly and trust in themselves. Thus, choosing to die resisting rather than to live submitting, they fled only from dishonor, but met danger face to face, and after one brief moment, while at the summit of their fortune, escaped not from their fear, but from their glory. So died these men as became Athenians. You, their survivors, must determine to have as unaltering a resolution in the field, though you may pray that it may have a happier issue. And not contented with ideas derived only from words of the advantages which are bound up with the defense of your country, though these would furnish a valuable text to a speaker, even before an audience so alive to them as the present. You must yourselves realize the power of Athens and feed your eyes upon her from day to day, till love of her fills your hearts. And then, when all her greatness shall break upon you, you must reflect that it was by courage, sense of duty, and a keen feeling of honor in action that men were enabled to win all this, and that no personal failure in an enterprise could make them consent to deprive their country of their valor, but they laid it at her feet as the most glorious contribution that they could offer. For this offering of their lives, made in common by them all, they each of them individually received that renown which never grows old, and for a sepulchre, not so much that in which their bones have been deposited, but that noblest of shrines, wherein their glory is laid up to be eternally remembered upon every occasion on which deed or story shall fall for its commemoration. For heroes have the whole earth for their tomb, and in lands far from their own, where the column with its epitaph declares it, there is enshrined in every breast a record unwritten with no tablet to preserve it, except that of the heart. These take as your model, and judging happiness to be the fruit of freedom and freedom of valor, never decline the dangers of war. For it is not the miserable that would most justly be unsparing of their lives. These have nothing to hope for. It is rather they to whom continued life may bring reverses as yet unknown, and to whom a fall, if it came, would be most tremendous in its consequences. And surely, to a man of spirit, the degradation of cowardice must be immeasurably more grievous than the unfelt death which strikes him in the midst of his strength and patriotism. Comfort, therefore, not condolence, is what I have to offer to the parents of the dead who may be here. Numberless are the chances to which, as they know, the life of man is subject. But fortunate indeed are they who draw for their lot a death so glorious as that which has caused your mourning, and to whom life has been so exactly measured as to terminate in the happiness in which it has been passed. Still, I know that this is a hard saying, especially when those are in question of whom you will constantly be reminded by seeing in the homes of others blessings of which once you also boasted. For grief is felt not so much for the want of what we have never known, as for the loss of that to which we have been long accustomed. Yet you, who are still of an age to beget children, must bear up in the hope of having others in their stead. Not only will they help you to forget those whom you have lost, but will be to the state at once a reinforcement and a security. For never can a fair or just policy be expected of the citizen who does not, like scions of a father, For never can a fair or just policy be expected of the citizen who does not, like his fellows, bring to the decision the interests and apprehensions of a father, while those of you who have passed your prime must congratulate yourselves with the thought that the best part of your life was fortunate, and that the brief span that remains will be cheered by the fame of the departed. For it is only the love of honor that never grows old, and honor it is, not gain, as some would have it, that rejoices the heart of age and helplessness. Turning to the sons or brothers of the dead, I see an arduous struggle before you. When a man is gone, all are wont to praise him, and should your merit be ever so transcendent, you will still find it difficult not merely to overtake, but even to approach their renown. The living have envy to contend with, while those who are no longer in our path are honored with a goodwill into which rivalry does not enter. On the other hand, if I must say anything on the subject of female excellence to those of you who will now be in widowhood, it will be all comprised in this brief exhortation. Great will be your glory in not falling short of your natural character, and greatest will be hers who is least talked of among the men, whether for good or for bad. My task is now finished. I have performed it to the best of my ability, and in words at least, the requirements of the law are now satisfied. If deeds be in question, those who are here interred have received part of their honors already, and for the rest, their children will be brought up till manhood at the public expense. The state thus offers a valuable prize as the garland of victory in this race of valor, for the reward both of those who have fallen and their survivors, and where the rewards for merit are greatest, there are found the best citizens. And now that you have brought to a close your lamentations for your relatives, you may depart. Wonderful to hear what a true statesman sounds like. In our situation, our country, our democracy as it existed failed greatly in meting out those rewards, such as the rewards of a free education, the rewards of health care, and the like. And now we are overcome or overtaken by a force, a cabal, that wants to even degrade those rewards or even rights such as we have hitherto possessed. It is hard to see our people overcoming them. And yet I think some of us still, even with a ironclad guarantee that the effort would fail, even in spite of that, we would wish to try to preserve or try to restore the state as we knew it, of the people, by the people, and for the people. I'll skip on and read a little more Pericles. The section describing the plague is worth reading as well. Many voices are predicting as much with us, given the removing of guardrails, as the phrase is today, in our health services. One cannot foresee the future. Although much of what has come to pass with this regime was exactly foreseen, and that must be said. In fact, those people who voted in favor of this upset were told what was likely to occur, and now that we see it occurring, here and there, some of them are regretting their votes, but at this point, I don't think it will be so easy to change the course which we are upon. Going back to that metaphor of changing the course of a heavy ocean liner. After the second invasion of the Peloponnesians, a change came over the spirit of the Athenians. Their land had now been twice laid waste, and war and pestilence at once pressed the author of the war, at once pressed heavy upon them. I'll start that again. Where I messed up in that last line, the word was hyphenated, and then I skipped a line, and so I went to, I thought it was SCIONS instead of apprehensions, but I'm going to leave it in just because why not? After the second invasion of the Peloponnesians, a change came over the spirit of the Athenians. Their land had now been twice laid waste, and war and pestilence at once pressed heavy upon them. They began to find fault with Pericles as the author of the war and the cause of all their misfortunes, and became eager to come to terms with Lacedaemon, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, and actually sent ambassadors thither who did not, however, succeed in their mission. Their despair was now complete, and all vented itself upon Pericles. When he saw them exasperated at the present turn of affairs and acting exactly as he had anticipated, he called an assembly, being, it must be remembered, still general, with the double object of restoring confidence and of leading them from these angry feelings to a calmer and more hopeful state of mind. He accordingly came forward and spoke as follows. I was not unprepared for the indignation of which I have been the object, as I know its causes, and I have called an assembly for the purpose of reminding you upon certain points and of protesting against your being unreasonably irritated with me or cowed by your sufferings. I am of opinion that national greatness is more for the advantage of private citizens than any individual well-being coupled with public humiliation. A man may be personally ever so well off, and yet if his country be ruined, he must be ruined with it. Whereas a flourishing commonwealth always affords chances of salvation to unfortunate individuals. Since then a state can support the misfortunes of private citizens while they cannot support hers, it is surely the duty of everyone to be forward in her defense, and not like you to be confounded with your domestic afflictions as to give up all thoughts of the common safety, and to blame me for having counseled war and yourselves for having voted it. And yet, if you are angry with me, it is with one who, as I believe, is second to no man, either in knowledge of the proper policy or in the ability to expound it, and who is, moreover, not only a patriot, but an honest one. A man possessing that knowledge without that faculty of exposition might as well have no idea at all on the matter. If he had both these gifts, but no love for his country, he would be but a cold advocate for her interests, while were his patriotism not proof against bribery, everything would go for a price. So that if you thought that I was even moderately distinguished for these qualities when you took my advice and went to war, there is certainly no reason now why I should be charged with having done wrong. For those, of course, who have a free choice in the matter and whose fortunes are not at stake, war is the greatest of follies. But if the only choice was between submission with loss of independence and danger with the hope of preserving that independence, in such a case, it is he who will not accept the risk that deserves blame, not he who will. I am the same man and do not alter. It is you who change, since, in fact, you took my advice while unhurt and waited for misfortune to repent of it. And the apparent error of my policy lies in the infirmity of your resolution, since the suffering that it entails is being felt by everyone among you, while its advantage is still remote and obscure to all, and a great and sudden reverse having befallen you, your mind is too much depressed to persevere in your resolves. For before what is sudden, unexpected, and least within calculation, the spirit quails. And putting all else aside, the plague has certainly been an emergency of this kind. Born, however, as you are, citizens of a great state, and brought up, as you have been, with habits equal to your birth, you should be ready to face the greatest disasters and still to keep unimpaired the luster of your name. For the judgment of mankind is as restless to the weakness that falls short of a recognized renown, as it is jealous of the arrogance that aspires higher than its due. Cease then to grieve for your private afflictions, and address yourselves instead to the safety of the commonwealth. if you shrink before the exertions which the war makes necessary, and fear that after all they may not have a happy result. You know the reasons by which I have often demonstrated to you the groundlessness of your apprehension. If those are not enough, I will now reveal an advantage arising from the greatness of your dominion, which I think has never yet suggested itself to you, which I never mentioned in my previous speeches, and which has so bold a sound that I should scarce adventure it now, were it not for the unnatural depression which I see around me. You perhaps think that your empire extends only over your allies. I will declare to you the truth. The visible field of action has two parts, land and sea. In the whole of one of these you are completely supreme, not merely as far as you use it at present, but also to what further extent you may think fit. In fine, your naval resources are such that your vessels may go where they please without the king or any other nation on earth being able to stop them. So that although you may think it a great privation to lose the use of your land and houses, still you must see that this power is something widely different, and instead of fretting on their account, you should really regard them in the light of the gardens and other accessories that embellish a great fortune, and as, in comparison, of little moment. You should know, too, that liberty preserved by your efforts will easily recover for us what we have lost, while the knee once bowed, even what you have will pass from you. Your fathers, receiving these possessions not from others, but from themselves, did not let slip what their labor had acquired, but delivered them safe to you. And in this respect, at least, you must prove yourselves their equals, remembering that to lose what one has got is more disgraceful than to be balked in getting, and you must confront your enemies not merely with spirit, but with disdain. Confidence, indeed, a blissful ignorance can impart, aye, even to a coward's breast. But disdain is the privilege of those who, like us, have been assured by reflection of their superiority to their adversary. And where the chances are the same, knowledge fortifies courage by the contempt which is its consequence, its trust being placed not in hope, which is the prop of the desperate, but in a judgment grounded upon existing resources whose anticipations are more to be depended upon. Again, your country has a right to your services in sustaining the glories of her position. These are a common source of pride to you all, and you cannot decline the burdens of empire and still expect to share its honors. You should remember also that what you are fighting against is not merely slavery as an exchange for independence, but also loss of empire and danger from the animosities incurred in its exercise. Besides, to recede is no longer possible, if indeed any of you in the alarm of the moment has become enamored of the honesty of such an unambitious part. For what you hold is, to speak somewhat plainly, a tyranny. To take it, perhaps, was wrong, but to let it go is unsafe. And men of these retiring views, making converts of others, would quickly ruin a state. Indeed, the result would be the same if they could live independent by themselves. For the retiring and unambitious are never secure without vigorous protectors at their side. In fine, such qualities are useless to an imperial city, though they may help a dependency to an unmolested servitude. But you must not be seduced by citizens like these, nor be angry with me, who, if I voted for war, only did as you did yourselves, in spite of the enemy having invaded your country and done what you could be certain that he would do, if you refused to comply with his demands. And although, besides what we counted for, the plague has come upon us, the only point indeed at which our calculation has been at fault. It is this, I know, that has had a large share in making me more unpopular than I should otherwise have been, quite undeservedly, unless you are also prepared to give me the credit of any success with which chance may present you. Besides, the hand of heaven must be borne with resignation, that of the enemy with fortitude. This was the old way at Athens, and do not you prevent it being so still. Remember, too, that if your country has the greatest name in all the world, it is because she never bent before disaster, because she has expended more life and effort in war than any other city, and has won for herself a power greater than any hitherto known, the memory of which will descend to the latest posterity. Even if now, in obedience to the general law of decay, we should ever be forced to yield, still it will be remembered that we held rule over more Hellenes than any other Hellenic state, that we sustained the greatest wars against their united or separate powers, and inhabited a city unrivaled by any other in resources or magnitude. These glories may incur the censure of the slow and unambitious, but in the breast of energy they will awake emulation, and in those who must remain without them, an envious regret. Hate and unpopularity at the moment have fallen to the lot of all who have aspired to rule others. But where odium must be incurred, true wisdom incurs it for the highest objects. Hatred also is short-lived, but that which makes the splendor of the present and the glory of the future remains forever unforgotten. Make your decision, therefore, for glory then and honor now, and attain both objects by instant and zealous effort. Do not send heralds to Lacedaemon, and do not betray any sign of being oppressed by your present sufferings, since they whose minds are least sensitive to calamity and whose hands are most quick to meet it are the greatest men and the greatest communities. Such were the arguments by which Pericles tried to cure the Athenians of their anger against him and to divert their thoughts from their immediate afflictions. As a community, he succeeded in convincing them. They not only gave up all idea of sending to Lacedaemon, but applied themselves with increased energy to the war. Still, as private individuals, they could not help smarting under their sufferings, the common people having been deprived of the little that they ever possessed, while the higher orders had lost fine properties with costly establishments and buildings in the country, and worst of all, had war instead of peace. In fact, the public feeling against him did not subside until he had been fined. Not long afterwards, however, according to the way of the multitude, they again elected him general and committed all their affairs to his hands, having now become less sensitive to their private and domestic afflictions, and understanding that he was the best man of all for the public necessities. For as long as he was at the head of the state during the peace, he pursued a moderate and conservative policy, and in his time its greatness was at its height. When the war broke out, Here also he seems to have rightly gauged the power of his country. He outlived its commencement 2 years and 6 months, and the correctness of his previsions respecting it became better known by his death. He told them to wait quietly, to pay attention to their marine, to attempt no new conquests, and to expose the city to no hazards during the war, and doing this promised them a favorable result. What they did was the very contrary, allowing private ambitions and private interests in matters apparently quite foreign to the war to lead them into projects unjust both to themselves and to their allies. Projects whose success would only conduce to the honor and advantage of private persons, and whose failure entailed certain disaster on the country in the war. The causes of this are not far to seek. Pericles, indeed, by his rank, ability, and known integrity, was enabled to exercise an independent control over the multitude. In short, to lead them instead of being led by them. For as he never sought power by improper means, he was never compelled to flatter them, but on the contrary, enjoyed so high an estimation that he could afford to anger them by contradiction. Whenever he saw them unreasonably and insolently elated, he would, with a word, reduce them to alarm. On the other hand, if they fell victims to a panic, he could at once restore them to confidence. In short, what was nominally a democracy became in his hands government by the first citizen. With his successors, it was different, more on a level with one another, and each grasping at supremacy. They ended by committing even the conduct of state affairs to the whims of the multitude. This, as might have been expected in a great and sovereign state, produced a host of blunders, and amongst them the Sicilian expedition, though this failed not so much through a miscalculation of the power of those against whom it was sent, as through a fault in the senders in not taking the best measures afterwards to assist those who had gone out, but choosing rather to occupy themselves with private cabals for the leadership of the commons, by which they not only paralyzed operations in the field, but also first introduced civil discord at home. Yet after losing most of their fleet, besides other forces in Sicily, and with faction already dominant in the city, they could still for 3 years make head against their original adversaries, joined not only by the Sicilians, but also by their own allies, nearly all in revolt. And at last, by the king's son Cyrus, who furnished the funds for the Peloponnesian navy. Nor did they finally succumb till they fell the victims of their own intestine disorders. So superfluously abundant were the resources from which the genius of Pericles foresaw an easy triumph in the war over the unaided forces of the Peloponnesians. During the same summer, the Lacedaemonians and their allies made an expedition with 100 ships against Zysanthius, an island lying off the coast of Elis, peopled by a colony of Achaeans and from Peloponnese, and in alliance with Athens. There were 1,000 Lacedaemonian heavy infantry on board, and Cnemus, a Spartan, as admiral. They made a descent from their ships and ravaged most of the country. But as the inhabitants would not submit, they sailed back home. So that was a bit strenuous, and I see I have gone long again. Just wishing we had men of that kind of integrity in America, but I think we have sent them packing. What was that line of poetry? The strong are saying nothing until they see, or whatever it is. what did he call it? Intestine faction has beset us. Our legislative branch of government has completely collapsed. Whatever the executive dictates is passed by a vote of 51, there being no discussion, no dissent. It is a party completely cowed. And of course, the game afoot is to cow the rest of the populace. And I, for one, hope not to live to see such a thing. But it is already late. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.